conservative values in the kingdom of God are not synonymous. This is the American experiment, this idea of freedom. The human heart is a wicked place. You have to have proper boundaries. Once you get power, it's hard to let power go. Charlie Kirk is white evangelical George Floyd.
Welcome back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Bri, and I am here with Mr. Adrian Crawford. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm okay. I am okay.
Okay? Why okay?
Yeah, there's just a lot going on. I think there's a lot going on. I think, just that I am working on, and I think there's a lot going on in the world. And so I think in that, there's just, in these moments, I become very my temperament becomes really just kind of not steady. It's not even the right word, but it just become very kind of like try to be calm just because, again, there's so much chaos. But so I just kind of my tone, everything like that is trying to view things in the world, try to process things and make sure I'm responding correctly. So yeah, that's what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we can just go ahead and jump right into this one. Okay. So we are filming this a few days post the shooting of Charlie Kirk. And we're not necessarily going to spend the entire episode breaking down that topic and everything that's going on. What we will say is that we did actually listen to the Candace Owens video that she posted, yesterday? So we are staying up to date on everything that's being released, on what is going on. I think we'll probably maybe get into our perspectives on it a little bit. We won't spend the whole episode talking about it, but what we are going to focus a lot on is a concept that we think has become very prevalent, has been prevalent, but hasn't been on the forefront of conversation over the past few days, which is specifically this idea of freedom.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned to me, I think about 2 days ago, that you wanted to talk about this. So can you share a little bit about why you think that it's important right now?
Yeah, because I think that, one of the things that we talk a ton about in our country is the idea of freedom. And, and it's a beautiful thing. There's freedom to move up in the world. There's freedom, to marry whoever. There's freedom in your relationships. There's just the ability to go and create and to make. And I think that's one of the things that's been a good part of what's made this nation great. But the thing I think a lot about, I'm hearing that rhetoric a lot about freedom, and it doesn't matter on what side. This has zero to do with political sides, because both sides talk about this idea. But as I think about freedom, I think freedom is an incredible responsibility. And I think what's starting to happen is that I think we don't understand. My question I would ask people is, freedom for what? Like, what you having freedom to do whatever, but what's the point of it? And because freedom was never meant to be just so we can have it. There should be for the betterment of society. It should be to progress and to push things forward. But I think our idea of freedom in today's world has been completely lost. I think it's just freedom, honestly, to do whatever the hell that you want to do. And whenever you do that, that becomes the unraveling of a society.
So why do you think that this is something that came to your mind as of recent?
When there's national conversations that go on, especially over the last 5, 6, 7 years, that kind of topic comes up of freedom. So people will talk about freedom of speech, right? And usually depending on what's going on, depending on what side is pushing against the other side. So they'll say, we got freedom of speech, right? People will talk about, freedom for, they should have their Second Amendment, their right, freedom of to be able to, bear arms and do this stuff like that. People have freedom with their bodies and all this. And so whenever there's a conversation that just happens, that word just keeps coming up. But what I started to realize is I think people are using their freedom, but why I think their freedoms are and why some of these things are starting to happen, because I think we are using our freedoms not for the betterment of humanity. We're just using our freedoms just for our own self-indulgences many times, for our own agendas that we want, for things that make us comfortable, instead of actually freedom that can be leveraged and used for the betterment of other people. And so I think that is why, because I think when we talk about freedom, we talk about it in this very American way of the land of the free. And it's and it's very, I don't even know the word I'm looking for, but it's really aspirational. But when you really dig down to it, I'm watching, I'm looking, I'm like, when I listen to politicians and pundits and other people talk about freedom, it's just a lot of times freedom to what makes them feel comfortable and convenient. Not this is better for one side or better for society or better for other people, like, for example, people talk about freedom when they were talking about the idea of with young kids in this site, and this will be controversial, but the idea of like transitioning and stuff like that. Like freedom, man, people should have the freedom to do that. And that, to me, I'm like, is that actually good for society? For a child who's incredibly young, who's still trying to figure, I can't imagine trying to figure out like a life-changing thing at 6, 7, 8 years old. That's insanity, right? And I'm like, but we're like, oh, but it's freedom, or us talking about the idea of like right now in the state of Florida we live in, like freedom, we got the right to bear arms. Well, we have a law right now in Florida to where, unless it's like in a place where alcohol is consumed, there's a couple other places, you can walk. I could literally walk into a place with an open carry gun. I don't have to have a concealed carry license. I don't have to conceal it anymore. And it's like, well, that's our freedom. Do you think that's actually healthy to walk into a place? You know what I mean? It's like, I just think we're just using it for our own well-being. And I think this is the American experiment, this idea of freedom. And I think is where we're starting to see a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think what's always so fun about these conversations that I get to play a little bit of devil's advocate per se. So we were kind of having this conversation yesterday. And whenever you mentioned like, people want to have freedom for what? I was kind of like, what do you mean for what? Like, I feel like people would say for the most part, let's say, insert a reason for why they would like to have freedom. People are going to say a noble reason. I don't think that most people are going to say, like, let's say the Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. I don't think that most people would say, because I want to be able to walk into an establishment with my gun whenever I want. Like, they're going to say maybe a broader mission and why they believe that it's important for this country to have those kinds of guardrails or lack thereof. Yeah. So are you saying that you think that people are saying that they want to do it for their own personal freedoms, not for the betterment of humanity, insert whatever thing is? Or do you think that there's just a different motivation that people aren't aware of?
Yeah, I think it'll definitely, if you ask them, they'll be like, it's, we're talking about like the right to bear arms, right? It's our constitutional right. It's, we should be able to protect our homes. We should be able to protect people. And I'm like, I have no problem with that. But honestly, when you really start talking to people about that and you get underneath it, it's just, they just don't like anyone putting any type of restriction on them. And that's the issue we have in our country right now, is that nobody wants restriction, or they want to put restrictions on things they don't like. And so it doesn't matter what side you sit on. You just look on the other side, and it's, and that's why when, it's like Charlie Kirk, he goes and, and just watching him be assassinated. And then you got people just instantly go into like gun control, or they instantly go into all these stuff. I'm like, dude, somebody died. And so my point of not getting to that yet is just that when I listen to people, I'm just like, you don't line up. I'm like, you just don't like what they're doing. You don't like what they're saying. So that's why it's funny right now that you see more of a, like a Republican kind of, with the presidency and all that, to where like after the death of Charlie Kirk, people are now saying, man, we need to go out there. People who celebrated Charlie Kirk's murder, people who said those, we need to get them fired. This is the same group that 3-4 years ago in 2020, they were talking about, man, cancel culture and how crazy it is. And they're literally doing the same thing. I think for me, what I finally have come to is like back in 2020, I was saying the same. I'm like, what the right says, it's no different. And what the left says, it's no different than the right. It is a literal spirit to do that. All of these policies lead to radical individualism, the right to do whatever you want to do. And when you do that, society does not flourish, and society begins to actually erode on the inside. And so that's why when people get so freaked out and say, I can't believe this is America. No, this is America, because this is where it's led to. This is where these things go. People can say,
things go.
This is where our society goes, where you have people being again, this has happened throughout the history of our country. In the 70s, we saw a lot of, and right in the end of the 60s, you know what I'm saying? We saw John F. Kennedy, we saw Martin Luther King, we saw Robert F. Kennedy. People assassinated, Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King. All these people were assassinated. We saw that. But it's like, but we're seeing now there's more this political violence just sitting there. And I'm like, we're starting to see this unraveling. And it wasn't even an ideology, is from what we know. And we don't even know the full story yet. That's what's crazy now. We don't even, like, no one trusts anything. So we have no, so we are living in complete a place of moving toward like anarchy, because like there's no control. Listen, a healthy society has boundaries. You have to have boundaries, and you can't just have freedom for the sake of freedom. Because listen, I understand the human heart, and the human heart is not what we think it is. We live in a world we think the human heart is naturally good. It's not. The human heart is a wicked place, and I think you have to have proper boundaries, and I think that's what I mean by that.
Yeah, I think it's important too to know that the context that we're in is we live in North Florida, which would be considered the
South
deep
Georgia. Yeah, South Georgia.
deep South.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the times whenever you have this conversation, you hear majority of the people that are surrounding us, they're far right. And so they would say that the lack of self-governance that's showing up within our nation right now is a product of the previous administration, is a product of extreme leftists. What's your take on that?
Honestly, it's interesting to me that and again, to be very clear, because this is what makes it funny to me, because I sit center right politically. But what makes it funny to me is that that people I listen to talk like that are so quick to always blame. They talk about personal responsibility, but always blame the government. Always blame President Biden. Always blame Barack Obama. But I'm like, okay, no. Just take personal responsibility then. But when somebody else is in office, when their guy's in office, they start talking about, oh, no. These people need to take personal responsibility. I'm like, so what is it? You know what I'm saying? Like at the end, it's not about that. It's not, you just don't like their policies. You just don't like how they do things. And those things can be right, wrong, whatever. You can debate that. You should. It should be, that's the greatness of our country. You can debate those things. But in the end, I think.
Well, maybe we should get into that.
Well, let me finish this part. Yeah. But I think in the end, what I'm trying to get us all to understand is that we have to start to peel back and actually look at it. Let's evaluate it. Because I think people just are talking and doing stuff, and no one ever stops and says, oh, this seems like the same thing. It just looks like your box is black and mine is purple. It's the same color box, same size box, whatever. One's just wrapped a certain way, the other one's wrapped another way. But it comes from the same thing. And I think that we have to start seeing this, because if we do not see this, we will continue to move down this road. Because everybody says, we got to change. Well, we have to change, and that change, you have to have wisdom. And wisdom is not found in these extremes. Wisdom is found on the edges. It's people willing to look at society, willing to lean in with empathy, but also willing to have truth as well. And that is how you begin to see that type of change happen. Now we can go to the next part.
No, I was going to say, because you mentioned us having the freedom to debate. I think from the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a huge conversation from that would be, do we legally have the freedom to debate, but are we going to see greater acts of violence whenever it comes to differences, and especially political opinions?
I 100% agree. I 100% believe we will, because we are a very underdeveloped emotional people. We are very anxiety driven. And, and we've talked a lot about that on the show, but it's the idea that we drive to black and white thinking. And so when you drive to black and white thinking, there's no creativity, there's no seeing any other sides. And so we don't have the toughness. That's what's interesting to me, is that everyone talks about, Gen Z and your generation, oh, they're not tough, da, da, da. But what I see is a lot of the people who bitch and complain the most are Gen X and baby boomers. Like, talking about they got to be tough. They're not emotionally tough. All of a sudden, they see somebody walking down the street that they don't like. They just, I was in a store one time, and this kid was just doing his job. This was during COVID. I was up in Colorado, and this kid was just doing his job. And we walked to the store, and the kid was like, hey, sir, you got to put a mask on. And this dude, you can just tell, right? He's like, listen, call it whatever you want, profile, whatever. He was definitely a MAGA guy, right? Okay. Had Wrangler jeans on. And so, whatever. So anyway, but here's what he said. He just starts going off. You can't tell I'm not doing that, my freedoms and all this stuff. The kid was just doing his job. I'm like, are you not tough enough emotionally to say, you know what? This kid's just doing his job. This kid ain't write the laws and policies of the story we're in. He's just getting paid probably $12 an hour, and he's just getting all this. And the fact is that we don't have enough toughness to sit there and like, let me listen, let me hear, and not spaz out. We have lost that. So to answer your question, I think it's going to be more of this because of people's lack of actual resilience to be able to sit there and listen to another side. It is so easy just to say the other side's evil. And that is a lack of toughness and resilience, I think, that every side lacks right now.
The other day, you were telling me that you think that there's going to be more acts of domestic terrorism in the future. Why do you think so?
Well, I felt that about 3 years ago, because I think that when you go to extremes like we've been going, and we don't have leadership on either side that actually lead. Leadership is not just about policies. Leadership is just not about, just about the position. But leadership is willing to give the people what they need. What we need right now across among all leaders. And I'm not just, and again, not that we talk about Republican, Democrat, whatever. I'm talking about leaders in corporations, leaders in churches, leaders everywhere. To be able to be a people that they can step in and realize, man, right now, they don't need to be people who stoke fires. They need to be people who can bring some calm. They need to bring people actually bring some rationale, some perspective to people. I think and I think that's what the world's needing right now. And I don't think we have that. I think that we live now in just this extreme. We currently have, President Biden was this way in his administration. President Trump's this way in his administration. President Biden, his administration did it more like it looked better. President Trump just out there on Front Street. They breed division with their rhetoric and what they say, and they do that. I see church leaders do the same thing. And it's like I see business leaders do the same thing, and they're not bringing good leadership. And so because of that, where are people going to look to actually find someone to bring calm? That was the brilliance of Martin Luther King, was the fact of when everyone in our community at that time wanted violence because they were so fed up of not having rights and the way that black people have been treated since the beginning of this country. But he came with a completely different message. So much so he lived his message that as a guy whose life was threatened all the time, he did not allow his security to have weapons. So you're talking about a guy whose house there was crosses put in his yard, death threats all the time, wife, kids, whatever. He literally lived out that thing of nonviolence because he knew that's what the world needed at the time. That is what the world needs right now. They need people to begin to step in the middle and actually bring what the society needs right now. And so I think that's why domestic terrorism will ramp up, because I think now it's going to become an eye for an eye type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that it will lead to another civil war?
I don't think we'll get to a civil war. Do I think there'll be potential certain groups against other groups or something like that? Maybe, probably. Because even the situation with the young man who they're saying who shot Charlie Kirk, he was just a kid who was like a gamer on the dark web. And it's not like he was a part of a group. He was just a part of whatever. Now, I have my thoughts on that if he's the only one or whatever, but that's not neither here or there. I just think that we're living in such a world that's so disconnected that you can write different memes and things or quotes on bullets as you murder someone. We just live so disconnected right now. And so that's why I don't think it'll be this whole left and right or some type of civil war like that. I don't think it'll get to that place, but I do believe there'll be maybe some groups against others and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think yesterday when we just kind of circling back to freedom, we were talking about this topic, and I was saying how, if I'm someone, let's say I'm a young girl who lives in Portland and I'm what would be considered maybe an extreme leftist, and I am talking to a older white male who lives in Georgia and is far right. And this gentleman is Christian, and he is trying to explain to me as to why his faith is what is best for humanity. And he's talking about the practical application of what you do with your body. And in the same breath, he is also someone who is saying that he believes a proper application of governance and order as it relates to the Bible is for him to be able to walk into any establishment with a gun, with no license, no testing.
Yep.
If this is just me, I'm playing devil's advocate here. This is actually, that's not devil's advocate. This is what I believe.
Yeah.
If I'm that girl, I am everything that man just said prior. I'm not taking it seriously.
Yeah.
Because what you just explained with your point is what you're saying in terms of personal preference.
Yeah.
When you want to do something that you want to do, you also don't have self-control.
Yeah.
And that's what you're
Yes.
telling me that I don't have.
Yeah.
That I don't have the self-control to live within certain levels of restraint because that's what's better for humanity.
Yep.
And that's why you're telling me that I need to change my ways, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the same principle that you have not yet mastered within a different area.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the challenges that I have within the conversations that we hear a lot throughout the South.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of friends who are like West Coast or in
Yeah.
places that are extreme left who they are coming from a different perspective because they feel the extreme of a different way.
Yeah.
But it's like what you're saying. There is such a lack of self-control. There's such a lack of resilience. And what I personally think is so horrific about the far right is that what they label it with is Christianity
Yes.
and biblical principles.
Yes.
And I think that is horrific.
Yeah. No, I think it's this. And so I have no idea where this next part's going to go. So we'll just see. Maybe no one listens to the podcast anymore. But here's what I would tell you. I think that the left, there are a lot of policies that are not good for humans. And I think are very hideous. And so I want to first start there. I also want to say what is as hideous or even more is on the right now of how we have wrapped the Bible and conservative values together. And it is so, and what's happening is that when someone starts to talk and they don't have conservative values, like completely whatever the conservative party, their line of everything, they don't have those conservative values, and you put the Bible, what happens when someone like, say, myself or some other people, we start having a conversation about, hey, conservative values in the kingdom of God are not synonymous. So when that starts to happen and you start, people really feel you're pulling the gospel apart. So I have empathy for them because there are people who genuinely feel like when I talk about things and you know, for example, where I'm like, yeah, I had no problem with someone kneeling during the national anthem. You would have thought people thought I literally said Jesus was not the Christ, because that's what they've been baked in. And that is what our country has been baked in. And what it does, it gives you a self-righteousness and thinks that you're better than what you are over here. And you know, when you have pastors coming out saying, if your pastor does not talk about Charlie Kirk's week, find a new church. That to me was such a problem. And and there's literally a lot of prominent guys doing that now. Here's why that is a problem, is because Charlie Kirk was a political assassination. He was in politics, policy, whatever. He was not a Christian martyr. He was not, again, though he used the Bible and stuff like that. And in the same breath, he also said some very harmful things to people, brought some division. There was things I agree with Charlie Kirk, things I didn't agree with Charlie Kirk. But what I will say is that when you start, like when you were telling people to leave churches because someone did not talk about another man and who they are, like that is insane to me. Because you know what? Those same churches would have been the same churches who would say to people, if Martin Luther King was killed, they would be in the same churches saying, if your pastor talks about MLK today, you know what? You should leave those churches if he talks about it today. Like, this is the part where I'm like, the fact that we cannot see this as a country, and it's not about black or white. That's not the issue. It's not about that. The issue is about we refuse and fail to just actually look at real things that are going on and to be able to say, we want power. That is what this whole thing's about. Left, right, it's all about who we want power. This is how we get power. And unfortunately, the church has gotten to bed with that power. And I heard somebody, and I think it was again, as much as I've had disagreements, me and you talk about Candace Owens a lot, like the one thing she's growing on me. I still have a lot of stuff with her, but she's really growing on me. Here's what she said. She was
before you get into that,
yeah.
I want to say something too, because I think whenever we talk about certain individuals and you say things like, oh, this person's grown on me, or I like this person, I'll just say too, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but 9 times out of 10, it's not, what you're not saying is that you agree with all of their values, or you're coming to agreement with their values. What you're saying is you're starting to
I'm seeing their growth.
Trust their internal world more in terms of they're more willing to apologize.
Yes.
They're more willing to own their thoughts. They're more willing to be patient and compassionate in the way in which that they communicate.
Yeah.
And so I want to say that as we're talking about,
and I'm trying to be better at that because I feel like I have to, and that's what's frustrating too. I feel like when we get in these conversations, I have to caveat so many things because if I say, oh, Candace Owens, or if I say, I don't know, Joe Biden, it's like you have to, I have to say, I don't agree with everything they say. I'm like, dude, like, if you want to know what I agree with, then this freaking ask me. Like, instead of doing that. But with her, she said something that I really was like, that's a great thing. It's like, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's this idea of freedom where it's in power. It was about power. And she said that, like, once you get power, it was actually from the Kanye song, Power, that once you get power, it's hard to let power go. And that is what I see. I see on all these different sides, people who, whether even on the left, that would think that what they talk about when it comes to immigration and it comes to women's rights and all that, it looks and sounds righteous. Just like when people start talking on the right about marriage and, they talk about marriage and they talk about sexuality, whatever, it looks and sounds righteous. But underneath it, this is the hideous thing of power that everyone latches themselves on. When I saw pastors like sending out tweets or posting a tweet that they sent to Charlie Kirk, like to do that, like you're clout chasing. I'm like, what are we doing? I'm like it's and the fact that we don't see that, and that's been the whole thing. It's all mass under our politics. It's all mass under Republican, Democrat, conservative, all this. It's all mass under there, but underneath it is this fight for power. But what I've realized is this power was never meant to be static. It was meant to be given away. That is why freedom is powerful, because freedom gives you power, but that power should be used to give away, to lift others up, to extend that to someone else. That is what power, and that is why freedom is so important. And we're not using our freedom for power to be given away. We're using it to continue to strengthen our side, or to continue to make whatever we want, to get what we want, and use that power for ourselves, our own indulgences, instead of using that power for the betterment of others.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really good. I think I do have a question in regards to the perspective that if your pastor didn't speak about Charlie Kirk, leave your church. So, and maybe you're talking about a specific intention, but for me, I would say that a personal value of mine would be at a level cultural relevance, in the sense of you are on the fringes of culture, you're paying attention to what's happening in the world, and it's a regular discussion of what's going on in the world and how is it shaping us and how should we be shaping it. And so I think that if I went to a church, granted, there'd be a little bit more grace, but if I went to a church and I showed up on Sunday and nobody, like, you can tell that everybody's sitting in the room and they're stressed out, they're thinking about what just happened. Like, that's the most prominent thing on people's minds. And you can feel it in the room, and no communicator says anything at all whatsoever. Not even just that first week, but weeks following after. I personally would be like, I don't know. Like, I think I'm going to try to find somewhere else that aligns more with what I value. Do I think that it's violating the scripture? No. But I would say that I want to find somewhere that aligns more with what I personally value.
Because
but
you're
is
saying,
that what you're saying?
No, because what you're talking about is that, hey, it's a big thing. And so you want to be able to say, man, are we even aware of it? How's this, like, because it is, it's been, beyond just Charlie Kirk, there were a lot of violence last week. So how does all this tie in? How should we look at it as a Christian or whatever it may be? When people are saying this, they're not saying that your pastor mentioned
They're not saying
Charlie.
They value cultural awareness.
Yeah, no, they're saying they want, did they come out there and turn him into a martyr? Like, I'm telling you, when you listen to people talk about this, it's like, I mean, when you can go to a point that says, you can just literally say, your pastor or your person is a coward if they don't say anything. And I'm like, this is where I talk about critical thinking. In our current cultural moment, if you are a pastor and you say something about like Charlie Kirk, you don't lose anything in the sense of this. In our current cultural moment, like, it's swung the other way now. It's not like how it was in 2020. I get that if you want to say there, but now it's not. You know what I mean? Like, it is not. So it's not, there's not like a loss.
In the South?
Yeah,
Like, would you say there's a lot of other places?
Like I think in the South, but I even think if you go maybe up in the Northwest or maybe whatever. But even then, it's kind of like, all right, people may like step away, whatever. But like, I think that they're saying that there's a certain way you need to honor this person. There needs to be, like, here's the thing. Let's talk about Charlie Kirk. What if somebody gets up on stage and says, hey, you know what, man, Charlie Kirk, hey, man, it's unfortunate he passed away, blah, blah, blah. We don't like any violence, blah, blah, blah. And then they went into, oh, but here's my disagreements with him. That's addressing it. That's some cultural thing. You think people are going to be like that? They would say, no, leave that church right away. Because they have now made this situation into this, like, and that's the thing. When you actually start studying where he was at, I do believe Charlie Kirk was a follower of Jesus. But also, I think some of these like evangelicals think that he was fully on the team, and he was not. He was absolutely not, in the sense of what certain ways that practices.
He wasn't the second Christ.
No, it's like, I'm like looking at this stuff. People are like, this dude's like Paul the Apostle. I'm like, like, you gotta like chill out, because here's what happens. Because here's the problem. When you start doing that stuff, there are people, and especially people who I and you and others, there are young black men and women who see that, and that makes them, it emphasizes more that this is a white man's religion. Because here's what happened. They did hear Charlie Kirk say that that he didn't believe black women had enough processing speed. Like, I literally we're not smart enough. He did say that, man, if there's a DEI candidate, if somebody gets on a plane, there's a black person, I'm gonna be a little bit wary of that, because it could be a DEI candidate. To say that, and again, I can give more, so to say that's not inflammatory. And again, he was a young man. So you know what? Some of his views probably through life would change. I would believe that Jesus would move on certain things. But again, to say that's not like a harmful thing, and you make this man to be this, it's not okay. And so anyway, I think that's what I mean. But should your church address it? Yeah, I had a friend of mine. I mean, he's literally taking flack and heat right now because he wasn't in town. And so he didn't want to leave it to someone else to talk about it. And so, and actually their sermon was all about this idea from Psalm 23. It was like you didn't have to go into all this. And he was going to eventually say something, blah, blah, blah. But, and anyway, he's trying to be slow to speak, because he's like, man, everybody wants to be prophetic. Everybody wants to say this. He's trying to be slow to speak. And he's got multiple people leaving. Oh, you're a coward. You didn't say anything. He wasn't even there. That's what I'm saying. The insanity of people want their own agenda. So that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting that like people calling him, like referring to him as a politician. Like, he's not a politician. He's also not even a political commentator. Like, he's a political performer, I think. Like, people who make their living off of
debating,
intense emotional engagement with politics. Not the same.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Is it considered an assassination?
I don't know what the difference of like an assassination.
Me neither, because I just thought about that when I was talking. I'm like,
yeah. I mean, I think it's because he's a public. I think it's because he's a public figure. It was very much so targeted and things like that.
That makes sense.
You know what I'm saying?
And then you get into like the people, a lot of people being outraged because this is like one of the first times in their life that somebody is killed, assassinated, whatever, that they view as themselves. Like,
yeah,
this is a white person
Yep.
who is decently wealthy. And
Gen Z. Yeah, Gen Z.
Well, that's an interesting conversation.
Now I'm furious about this.
Yep.
And a lot of people have issues with it for different reasons, but I feel like I've seen a lot of people like prominent figures are dying all the time, and you don't care because maybe you don't know about it, but like you at least don't feel so strongly about it because you can't
see yourself in them.
Yeah.
And
No,
it like shows a different kind of immaturity of like you're unable to resonate with anything unless it's like you can see yourself perfectly in it.
Yeah. And I get why that is a thing for him. I mean, for people seeing that. I mean, because it's the same. I mean, in like when Kobe died, like when Kobe Bryant died, like for a lot of like basketball people, other people like who again me playing with him, doing stuff, like it was one of those deals where like it really was like, I have not talked to Kobe since we were in high school, but it was like it felt like I lost a family member, because you could really see that, and we grew up with him and all the stuff, and so I understand, and I really do, like I have empathy for people who's like really like where Charlie Kirk actually really helped them. He really did help them, and I have empathy for people like that. I think what I have is where now people are now trying to leverage and use his death as now this bigger trumpeting, this call or whatever. And then on the other side of it, I have an issue because these are the same people that in 2020 were ridiculing black people for making George Floyd this whole thing. And I told my friends the other day, man, look, Charlie Kirk is white evangelical George Floyd. Like, it is turned into this whole thing now, and it is not a great thing. But I think the number one thing I just want people to look at, and I've been saying this for years, it's like one of the things when you say for a long time and people think you're crazy, and I still feel like I'm crazy sometimes. I'm like, both, like, the parties and the sides are no different. They're just looking at it from a different angle, but it's the same spirit. Because I think this is what's being exposed right now. What is being exposed is the reality that the same thing that people were saying are now, that they were against, are now for it. Meaning they were against cancel culture. But now with this situation, we should get people fired. You should leave people's churches, doing stuff like that. The idea that, man, this person was lifting him up, because of his death and what happened, which was tragic and it was awful and it was horrible. But now it's become like this symbol. And when that happened with George Floyd, people were like this. In the end, here's what happened. Well, this is what people are going to bring up. George Floyd was a criminal. George Floyd was this. He was this. We have no idea. He didn't have a public platform, so we have no idea George Floyd's faith. What I'll say about Charlie Kirk? Oh, he was out bringing conservative values back, getting young people engaged in voting. It will be, and then you got the other side. Well, he was hateful. He was this. It's legitimately the same thing. And that's what I've been saying for like the last 4 or 5 years is that we're looking at it like they're different and they're really not. It is radical individualism at the core. And we have to begin to change. We have to begin to think about it different, but we all have to start critically looking at it and being able to have enough emotional intelligence to see nuance. Things are nuanced. They're not black and white, and you've got to be able to do that.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I have a question. I think the last episode we went in a deep dive about mental health and emotionality. And so I think there are a lot of people that I think maybe sometimes get discounted because of the extremes in discourse who see these things happening. They probably have a similar perspective as you where they're like, I'm not really extreme right, I'm not really extreme left, but I am overwhelmed by the increase in danger and violence and they just feel scared. Yeah. Like whenever I was in California, I think I told you about this. There was at one point in time where I was just standing in front of the house. It's like late at night. There's this man who sees me standing at the door and just starts rushing and speeding towards the door. Yep. And then there are situations like that happening all the time. Yep. There's break-ins whenever there's a story of the woman who was on the metro who in Charlotte, right, North Carolina, just a guy behind her randomly gets up, stabs her. And there's been a series of different stories that have hit the media. You see it in the media. You can also expect that it's increasing in people's daily lives as well. And I'm grateful that I have been equipped, to kind of handle those situations with a sense of urgency. I think most people, they just feel really afraid. If I lived in a city where I'm taking the metro every day, I would now be afraid of who's sitting behind me, what's going on at a different measure than what maybe I was before. And so when you see these things happening, what kind of impact does it have on your emotionality and your mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that this week I had moments where I was really angry, and I got really angry because of just the lack of humanity, of caring for humanity. People celebrating and cheering, saying, well, this is what happens when you push hate. No, there's a wife and 2 kids without a father. No man who was willing to go into an open place, debate issues. He was very well thought out when he would say, whether you liked him or not, he just went flippantly throwing stuff out there, right? And he was a human. We watched somebody be murdered right in front of us. That's horrible. And so I think that's what really got me. On the other side of it is like what really made me frustrated was the fact that you had like people now just using this to push values, and this is all the far left, and how they were instantly, before we knew anything, they were all, this is the far left, homophobic, or people, or LGBTQ. I mean, it's like, do we even know who did it? We didn't even know anything, and we have people just saying that stuff, and I think that instead of us saying no, someone died, and can we just mourn that? And no one says anything. Can we just mourn? Somebody died. And that hurts. And that's all we do. That is where it gets me emotional. It gets me really upset. And then on the same thing, it makes me hopeless, because I'm just like, where are we going to where we cannot mourn the death of someone? To where we are so insensitive to watch someone get shot in the neck right in front of us that we're just like, oh, and then just have all our opinions. That's the thing. That's the thing that really does. So I think that's what. But I also think this is why you have to have really good friends and good mentors. One of my really good mentors, Tim Johnson, I've been on the phone with him the last couple of days. And one thing I love about him is that he always makes me keep my eye on the ball. And that's one thing that he told me. He's like, yes, these are real things, but do not let this be a distraction for the work that you're doing. Do not let this be a distraction, because this is what this is going to turn into for a lot of people, is a distraction. Because at the end, it's this. One of my favorite books is Nehemiah, and Nehemiah 6:3. He had a lot of people. He had these two guys mocking him, and they really were trying to set up this kind of setup. It really was a setup for him to come down the wall, get in the battle fight, try to kill him. And he was up on the wall building this wall. And he says, "I'm engaged in it." He's like, "Why would I come down there with you? I'm engaged in a great work." And that Nehemiah 6:3 has been sticking in my soul right now. Of that, I'll talk about it on here because I think that I do a bigger thing of freedom, whatever. But when it's all said and done, it's actually, as I've worked through, it's fueled me more to the mission. I think that this is how do we get this better? We have to raise up more integrated, whole people, more authentic leaders. We need more leaders in the world. We need more leaders who actually are secure in who they are, that they actually can have debate with other people and not feel like the other people are the enemy. Because that's how you have healthy debate. When you look, they're not the enemy, and I may not agree with you, but also I know what I believe. So if I know what I believe, you can believe that, and it's not going to make me feel like I've got to become like this, you're on the other side. No, we need to raise up more authentic leaders who are more whole and healthy, that they can lead better. Hey guys, I hope today was actually helpful for you. Here's what I want to challenge us all with. Every day we have freedom. You have the ability to make choices here in this country. And what I want to encourage you with is, ask yourself, are you using your freedom now for the betterment of humanity? Or do you use it to just push maybe your own agenda or what you want? Because freedom, there's been a lot of people who've lost lives. There's been a lot of people who have sacrificed for us to have freedom. But it should not be for freedom for us to do whatever we want, but it's be freedom to make this world better and move it forward. Until next time, keep writing the rules.